This week, we speak with the University of Washington's Sustainable Fisheries Managing Editor and Developer, Max Mossler, about how the ocean could be our solution in meeting the growing demand for food. The demand our multi-billion global population puts on the planet for protein increases exponentially each year. By the year 2050, it's presumed that we're going to need around 500 billion kilograms of meat, and at the moment we supply the majority of our demand for protein by means of land-based agriculture. Unfortunately, the farming of meat is one of the most harmful and carbon-emitting industries in the world. Not only does it harm our environment, it requires a massive amount of dedicated land, competing with our own needs and the habitats of other animals. The ocean not only provides a vastly larger space for aquatic farming, but the sustainability of the species like scallops and mussels who feed themselves and filter water as they grow are endless. A paper released in Nature titled "The Future of Food Comes from the Sea" calculates that the ocean could provide sustainably 80 to 103 billion kilograms of food, a 36 to 74% increase compared to the current yield of 59 billion kilograms, if we begin following these 4 steps.
The first is to improve fishery management, implement policy reforms to address mariculture, advance feed technologies for fed mariculture, and shift consumer demand. Each one of those things can happen right now. And there's not like a progression of steps. It's let's do all of that right now. It will require a lot of buy-in from governments, NGOs, from companies, all that kind of thing. So it will be a big collective effort. A really important paper came out earlier this year by Ray Hilborn, was the lead author on it, that showed that fisheries that are just simply monitored do really well. Like that's the first step with fishery management is monitoring those fisheries, knowing what the stock is doing, knowing biomass, all those sorts of things. That's the very first step. So countries that are able to monitor their fisheries have more sustainable fisheries, and the ones that don't, generally because they're impoverished and still developing, don't have the capacity to monitor their fisheries. So those are the ones that generally do poorly. There's a role I think that countries with good fishery management have here. I think they can help other countries monitor their fisheries, but that's the very first step is monitoring. Unfed mariculture is, I would argue, is the most sustainable food on the planet. Plant, animal, anything. That is the most sustainable thing to eat on the planet, and it is absolutely crazy that like mussels are not just an integral part of every single person's diet. They're so good for you. They're so healthy. They filter the seawater. They make the seawater cleaner. It's absolutely crazy. The most sustainable way to grow fish is to use the least amount of food, or to use food that is fairly low impact. And right now, a lot of the food that is fed, it comes from wild fisheries. So there's a lot of like what we call reduction fisheries, which are fisheries that are like the largest fishery in the world, the Peruvian anchoveta. Nobody eats it. It's just caught to be reduced into fish meal, and that fish meal is sold to fish farms, and it turns into salmon. So it has environmental impacts, certainly more than unfed aquaculture. And so there's a lot of research being done into how do we reduce the amount of wild caught fisheries that we feed to aquacultured species, or can we use something that's lower impact? Can we replace some with plants? All that research is ongoing. Insects are one of them. Like there's different kinds of algae that are being developed to feed that can create a similar like nutritional profile. These 3 graphs are basically wild fisheries on the left, fed mariculture in the middle, and unfed mariculture on the right. And it basically shows how much we as a global society could produce sustainably, and what can get us to that sustainability. So for wild fisheries, all the way on the left, you can see that right now we produce like a little over 50 megatons of food, and we can increase that to almost 60 with some fisheries management reform around the world. So that's how we would do that. Like, we would maximize the amount of sustainable wild fish that we get by reforming fishery management around the world. The middle figure there, that's fed mariculture. So that is how much edible production we could create by using policy reforms, technological innovation, or technological innovation that's highly ambitious. Fed mariculture produces about 7 megatons of food, and we need to increase that. And so using policy reforms, that gets us to a little bit more, and then you can see if we have policy reform plus some amount of technological innovation, which is what I was talking about earlier. So just making fish farming more efficient, using less feed, we can produce, it goes up to about 17 megatons. And if we somehow are able to reduce wild fish inputs into farmed fish by 95%, which is what that super ambitious part is, we could have well over 150 megatons of food, which is pretty much all the protein, which is more than enough protein to feed 10 billion people in 30 years. And then on the right is the unfed mariculture, which I'm just such a huge fan of, because all that it requires is policy reform. And the more policy reform that we have, the more seafood we get. And the limit for that is pretty high. The limit does not exist. And what's really important about these three is that they have price next to them. So this is supply of what is possible economically. And one of the reasons I think this paper is so important is because it wasn't just a science paper that showed like, oh, here's what's possible, like here's what is biologically possible. It is, here's what's biologically possible under different price scenarios, which is much more realistic. So we have some realism with the science, which is just really, really great.
As a company with a goal of promoting sustainable eating, we feel that it is our responsibility to shift consumer demand towards using seafood as your primary source of protein. The seafood industry is leading the way for sustainable protein suppliers around the world to follow suit and utilize the full potential of our oceans and resources that we have available with much less impact than we are seeing right now. Not only will it benefit the environment, it's a healthier protein than red or white meat and can still satisfy a hungry customer. Keep tuned into our 3-Minute Market Insight as we keep you up to date on the latest trends in sustainable seafood and how it will affect the industry. Thank you for joining me for the TradeX Foods 3-Minute Market Insight. This has been Tasha Cadence, reminding you to stay safe, buy smart, and eat more seafood.